All right, so here's a new factory idea. Well, maybe it's an old idea. It's new to me. It's also going to be, fair warning, it's going to be a pretty nerdy topic today, like really nerdy. So nerdier than you probably think. uh, yeah. So, so what I have here is it's a factory design that is cellular, tileable, and ideally I haven't tested it at scale yet, but ideally the performance scales with the surface area of the factory, despite the fact that uh, it uses trains with generic station names and it's compact. So start off with one of the problems with using stations that have generic names, and what I mean by that is we've got a number of stations in here that are called in. So we've got this guy right here, this guy right here. In fact, just about all the stations are named the same. They're all called in. And we've got a number of stations that are also called out. Um, and so one of the problems with using generic station names is that when you want to activate and deactivate stations with generic station names, a number of trains will all sort of swarm that station. Typically, a number of trains will swarm that station, and then the first one that gets there will actually go in there, and depending on your factory layout, you might disable that station, and so all the other trains that went to that station hoping to serve it all get routed back, or maybe you've got a stacker before it and you don't disable it, and so all the trains that are coming up to that station might actually park, behind it and wait until the current one leaves. So the problem with that is that really to pull off a really compact cellular design, you basically need to have trains leaving their parking spot, the generic parking area. They need to leave that with a destination and be able to guarantee that they can serve that destination. And ideally, only one train leaves to serve any particular destination, not a flock of trains or a swarm of trains, right? And there are a variety of ways that you can get around that. I guess, if you throw enough combinators at it, you could probably wind up with a pretty complex system that solves that problem pretty well. The only problem is that if you have other issues you need to solve, you're going to need to deal with that complexity over and over and over again as you're trying to solve all of the incidental issues or all like the side effects of scaling your factory. So combinators are not great. So the other thing that you can do is instead of using rail signals in your factory, you can use chain signals and rail chain signals. And what that means is that trains will only leave, if your entire path all the way up to the stations only has chain signals, then what happens is your trains will only leave once that entire path is clear, and therefore multiple trains will not path find to the same station because only one of them will have actually successfully locked that path. Furthermore, once a train gets to a station, it's okay to disable that station while it's loading or unloading because the train conditions will still all be valid and still work. So there's no need to leave a station active once a train arrives. Now, with that logic, a train can pull in here. For instance, this station, right? This station will become disabled, as you can see. It goes red. And then any other trains waiting to go to, say, so if this was like a steel plate in station, any other trains that are also looking to go to the steel plate station will start looking elsewhere once this train pulls in. They'll no longer consider this as an option, and therefore any other stations that are currently looking for steel plates become valid targets for those trains, so it really improves throughput. I told you this would be nerdy, so yeah, I warned you. Yeah, so that's the idea, is you just use chain signals. Now, the problem with chain signals is they really hurt throughput. You know, in the worst case, you basically only have one train moving at a time. Now, the reason why that's not the case with this one is because this grid actually allows for enough concurrent pathways through the factory that as trains are making progress towards their particular target, a number of paths are still open for trains to serve other targets. So throughput is quite high on a design like this. Furthermore, I break the rule of only using chain signals in two instances. The first instance, I use rail signals here, and this is probably not necessary, but this is mostly just for me to artificiate producers and consumers, so you might even be able to ignore this. But the core purpose of having these signals here is that the moment that the back of this train leaves this little block right here, this section is now a valid target for another train. And what that means is if in the time that it took for this train to leave the station or whatever, or if this was a very hungry station for resources, the moment this train leaves, if this station still wants to be active and still wants to have another consumer, the moment that the back of this train leaves this block, which is virtually instant, you know, as soon as it gets out of here, another train will then start wanting to pathfind back into here. So it's like an immediate response to this train leaving. That's the first reason why I use rail signals. The second instance where I use rail signals is when progressing to that point in this train network does not open any new options for the train. So let me try and describe that a different way. So I have a train waiting right here, and it was allowed to make progress here even though the entire path was not clear because of this rail signal. Now, the reason why I allow a train to sit and park in this location is because it doesn't matter what his goal is after this, because the only thing that he can do if he chooses to go down this path is come to the parking lot. In fact, the only reason why he would come down this path is to go to one of these parking lot stations to refuel or to wait for a job to do. And because of that, it doesn't matter what the purpose of the train being in this location is. It doesn't matter what the exact target station is that he's on his way to try and meet, because the end result of his next step will always be the same. He's just going to go into this area, and that's the end of it. There's no new options that pop up. Conversely, if I allowed the train to park at this point, he might be parking because of this station or because of this station, and then depending on whether there are currently trains in there or whether they're becoming active or inactive or yada yada, this pathway will become blocked because of that train not having made a concrete decision on what it's allowed to do next. So yeah, I guess another way of saying that is that being in this slot does not offer any new options over waiting at a station beforehand. So if all that makes sense, what we have is a station that doesn't use any logical train network, that has trains that only move when they've got a particular objective in mind, and yet as a whole, the network still has high throughput, even though trains will only move once they've locked a path, and most of it is predominantly rail signals or chain signals. So I don't know if this is of value to anybody else, but yeah, hope you liked it.